Make sure to like the video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe so you never miss a new story. My name is Claire and I'm 56 years old. If you had asked me a year ago to describe my life, I would have smiled and said, comfortable. Not exciting. Not tragic. Just comfortable. I've been married to my husband Tom for over 3 decades. We live in a quiet suburb outside of Seattle in the same house we raised our 2 children in. They've grown and gone now, one living in Portland, the other in Chicago, and our lives have settled into a gentle, familiar rhythm. Mornings start with coffee on the back porch, listening to the birds. Tom usually reads the paper while I tend to the garden or catch up on laundry. Our conversations are kind, predictable. Dinners are home-cooked, television is routine, and weekends are mostly spent in silence or around the occasional golf game or dinner invitation. It's the kind of life that looks peaceful from the outside, and in many ways, it is. But lately I've felt something I can't quite name. Not unhappiness, not exactly. More like a quiet tug beneath the surface, like a thread being pulled somewhere deep inside. I've stopped asking why I feel it and started wondering what it might be trying to show me. I thought maybe it was just a phase. Or maybe something about getting older. Watching your skin change, watching the calendar flip faster than it used to, realizing there are more memories behind you than dreams ahead. I don't know. Maybe it's all of it. That feeling was lingering the day Tom walked into the kitchen and said, "Mason invited us to dinner tonight." It was a regular Saturday. I was folding laundry, sipping tea, already planning a quiet evening with a movie I'd seen 10 times before. "Tonight?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Bit short notice." "He just texted," Tom replied, reaching for the fridge. "Thought it might be good to get out for a change. It's just him and Elise." Mason was one of Tom's college friends. They'd reconnected a couple years ago when Mason moved back to Washington after a divorce. He was charming in a way that made people listen when he spoke, and Elise, his second wife, was the kind of woman who wore silk scarves without looking pretentious. We'd had dinner with them once or twice before. Pleasant evenings that left me feeling both inspired and vaguely inadequate, though I could never put my finger on why. So I agreed. I found a dress I hadn't worn in ages, a deep plum wrap dress that used to make me feel something close to confident. I added a touch of mascara, ran a brush through my shoulder-length hair, and slipped on my pearl earrings, the ones Tom gave me for our 20th anniversary. "You look beautiful," he said as I walked into the living room. I smiled and thanked him. But something about the way he said it felt automatic, like reciting a line we both knew by heart. I didn't know then that that night would change something in me. That a single question, one I wasn't prepared for, would echo in my mind for months. That a quiet dinner with friends would become the spark for the most honest conversation I'd ever have with myself. But that's where the story begins. And I promise you won't believe what happened next. We pulled up to Mason and Elise's house just as the sun began to dip below the tree line, painting the sky in streaks of lavender and rose gold. Their house was the kind of modern I never quite understood. Clean lines, large windows, not a curtain in sight, but somehow it still felt warm. Inviting even. Tom reached over and gently touched my hand before turning off the ignition. "Let's just enjoy tonight, okay?" I nodded, smiling out of habit more than anything else. I was already slipping into that familiar mode I often wore at social gatherings. Supportive wife, pleasant company, part-time ghost. The kind of woman who listens well, laughs in the right places, and always offers to help clear the dishes. Elise opened the door before we even rang the bell. She was radiant as always, tall, graceful, with perfectly messy hair that looked like it had been done by a French stylist even though she insisted she just threw it up. She greeted me with both arms outstretched. "Claire, it's so good to see you again." Her hug was soft and she smelled faintly of orange blossom and something expensive I couldn't name. Inside the house was glowing. Soft jazz drifted from hidden speakers, candles flickered on the mantel, and the scent of rosemary and garlic wrapped itself around me like a memory from someone else's life. The dining table was already set, beautifully. Linen napkins, gold-rimmed glasses, hand-painted ceramic plates. I felt underdressed in my wrap dress and suddenly conscious of the scuff on my shoes. "Mason's in the kitchen, of course," Elise said with a playful eye roll. "He insisted on cooking." Tom followed her inside, laughing, already settling into the easy comfort that came with their long friendship. I trailed behind, trying not to overthink the unfamiliar pang in my stomach. Was it envy? Resentment? I couldn't tell. Mason greeted us with a grin and a dish towel slung over one shoulder. He looked exactly as I remembered. Tall, silver-haired, the kind of effortlessly confident man who could talk politics or wine or art without sounding smug. He kissed Elise on the cheek when she handed him a glass of wine, and I watched the way her hand lingered on his back, casual and practiced. "Claire, Tom," he said warmly, turning toward us. Come in, come in. I hope you're hungry." Dinner was as flawless as the setting. Grilled sea bass with roasted vegetables, lemon couscous, and a tomato salad that tasted like summer. We sat around their long oak table, the four of us talking about travel and books and the latest neighborhood gossip. Elise told a story about her garden being invaded by squirrels. Tom laughed louder than I'd heard in weeks. For a while I forgot that I felt off. I smiled. I listened. I played the part one knew well. But there was something underneath it all. I couldn't ignore the way Mason looked at me when I spoke. Really looked, not in a way that felt flirtatious but intentional. Like he was actually listening, not just waiting for his turn to speak. It felt foreign and deeply unsettling. At one point, Elise and Tom got caught up in a debate about hiking trails outside Spokane, and Mason turned to me. "You've always had such a calming presence," he said, his voice quiet enough that it didn't interrupt the others. "Tom's lucky." I blinked, unsure how to respond. I hadn't heard a compliment that felt that sincere in, God, I didn't know how long. "Thank you," I managed. "That's kind of you." He nodded but didn't look away. "Do you ever wonder if there's more? To all of this, I mean." I tilted my head slightly. More. More to you. More than the roles we fall into, wife, hostess, mother. Do you ever wonder who you were before all that? The words struck me with an intimacy I wasn't prepared for. My fork paused just above my plate. "I'm sorry," he said quickly, sitting back. "That was out of line. I think we forget sometimes who we are before life puts us in a box." I wanted to say something witty. Deflect. Change the subject. But instead I said the truth. "I used to draw," I said softly. He smiled. "What happened?" I stopped. He didn't ask why. He just nodded like he understood. Like he'd done the same thing with some part of himself. Elise called my name, asking for my opinion on some gallery she wanted to visit, and the spell broke. But my mind stayed in that moment, tangled up in the simple question that had knocked something loose inside me. Do you ever wonder who you were before all this? Later, as we said our goodbyes and stepped into the cool night air, Tom was cheerful, chatty, already suggesting we host dinner next time. I nodded along, but inside something had changed. I didn't know what it meant. But I knew that a seed had been planted. And I couldn't ignore it. Not anymore. Sunday morning arrived the way it always did. Quiet, familiar, wrapped in routine. I woke before Tom as I usually did. The early light filtered through the bedroom curtains in soft stripes, casting golden lines across the floor. I stayed in bed a little longer than usual, my eyes fixed on the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs and the occasional bird call outside our window. But my thoughts weren't quiet. They kept circling back to last night. To Mason's question. To the way he looked at me, not romantically, not intrusively, but like I was real. Like he saw me. Not just Tom's wife. Not just someone sitting politely across the table nodding at the right times. But a woman with a mind. A history. A pulse. And that question, do you ever wonder who you were before all this? Kept echoing like a bell I couldn't unring. I finally slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Tom. I padded downstairs in my robe and made a pot of coffee. The smell filled the kitchen like it always did, but even that felt different this morning. Too strong. Too sharp. Or maybe I was just noticing things I'd stopped paying attention to. I poured myself a cup and wandered into the small sunroom at the back of the house. The one I used to call my corner when the kids were young. It used to be where I'd read or write or sketch before it became a sort of catch-all space for storage bins and old furniture. I hadn't sat there in months. Maybe years. I pulled open the small chest of drawers tucked in the corner and found it. My old sketchbook. Dusty. Bent at the corners. I traced the cover with my fingers, almost reverently. Inside were pages of half-finished faces, charcoal outlines of flowers, loose watercolors that had bled too much but still felt alive. Some were dated nearly a decade ago. Others weren't dated at all. I'd stopped signing them at some point, like I didn't want to claim them. Or maybe like I didn't think they mattered. I sat in the faded armchair, coffee in one hand, sketchbook in the other, and just stared. Not at any one page in particular, but at the idea of them. The memory of myself that lived inside them. Tom eventually came downstairs, hair still tousled, rubbing his eyes. "You're up early," he murmured, smiling. "Couldn't sleep," I replied. My voice was even casual. I didn't want to say I couldn't sleep because your friend asked me a question that cracked open a part of me I didn't know still existed. He came over and kissed the top of my head. "You okay?" I nodded. "Just thinking." That seemed to satisfy him. He wandered into the kitchen and I stayed where I was, still holding the sketchbook, still staring at the past version of myself who had made something. Who had once believed her time was worth putting on paper. Later that day I found myself in the garage, rummaging through old boxes until I found my art supplies. They weren't in great shape. Dried paint, stiff brushes, a few crumbling charcoal sticks. But it felt like opening a time capsule. Like visiting a version of me who still dared to want something. That afternoon, while Tom watched football, I quietly set up a corner in the sunroom again. I didn't say anything to him. I didn't need to. It wasn't a secret, but it felt private. Like a door I was unlocking just for myself. I picked up a pencil and stared at the blank page for what felt like forever. What do you even draw after a decade of silence? I started with something simple. A line. Then another. And before I knew it, I was sketching the curve of a petal. Not from a photo, not from memory, just from instinct. And even though my hand was shaky, it felt like breathing. It wasn't good. It wasn't supposed to be. But it was mine. Tom peeked his head in at one point. "You're drawing again?" he asked, a little surprised. "Just playing around," I said. He nodded. "That's great," he replied almost too casually. Then he walked away, leaving me with my pencil and my pulse and the strange sense that something was shifting beneath my skin. I didn't know what this meant yet. I wasn't planning to quit my life or reinvent myself or run away to a cabin in the woods. But something inside me had woken up. Something quiet and old and hopeful. And I wasn't ready to silence it again. It was Wednesday evening, 3 days after the dinner at Mason and Elise's, when Tom noticed something had shifted. Not just the drawing supplies that had reappeared in the sunroom. Not just the quiet hours I now spent there, sketching with a look on my face I hadn't worn in years. But something in my energy, subtle maybe, but enough that he finally asked. We were finishing dinner. Grilled chicken, asparagus, nothing special. The TV murmured from the living room where a rerun of Jeopardy! Waited to fill the background silence. Tom reached for his glass of water and said casually, "So, what's going on with you lately?" I looked up from my plate. "What do you mean?" He shrugged, but his eyes stayed on mine. "I don't know. You've been somewhere else this week." I set my fork down. There was a moment, a long breath of silence between us that felt heavier than the clinking of silverware or the distant TV. "I've just been thinking," I said finally. "About what?" I hesitated. I could have lied. Could have said something light. Grocery lists, the kids, the news. But something in me didn't want to keep brushing it away. So I took a breath and said, "About myself." Tom blinked. "Yourself?" "Yes." My voice was quiet but sure. "About who I am. Or who I was. Or maybe who I'm becoming again." He gave a soft, uncertain laugh. "That's vague." I almost smiled. "I guess it is." He leaned back in his chair, watching me now the way someone watches a kettle they didn't realize had been simmering. "Is this about the other night?" "About Mason." I looked at him carefully. "Partially. Did he say something to you?" His voice was gentle, not accusatory. "Just trying to understand." I nodded. He asked me if I felt like I was living my life. Or just the one that happened around me. And honestly, I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. Tom was quiet for a long moment. He tapped his fingers lightly on the edge of his plate. "And what did you say?" I didn't have an answer. He exhaled, slow and long. "Claire, you know I love you, right?" "I do. You've built this home, this life. Everything we have. I couldn't have done any of it without you." His words were kind. Familiar. But also limited. Like a framed picture that hadn't been updated in years. "I know," I said. "And I've loved this life too. I'm not ungrateful. I think I forgot what it felt like to want something for myself." Tom sat back, absorbing that. After a pause, he asked, "And what is it you want?" The question startled me more than it should have. Because the truth was, I didn't know yet. I just knew I wanted something. I think I'm still figuring that out, I answered honestly. But I've started drawing again. He nodded slowly. I saw. I used to love it. Before the kids. Before everything else took over. And I think somewhere along the way I convinced myself it didn't matter anymore. But it does, he asked, not skeptically but curiously. It does, I said. Because when I'm sketching I feel like I'm breathing in a way I haven't in a long time. He was quiet again. His expression wasn't upset, it was thoughtful. Maybe even a little sad. I never meant to take that away from you, he said softly. I know. You didn't. I gave it up myself. We sat in that stillness for a moment. Two people who'd built a good life. A stable one. But who maybe hadn't looked at each other fully in a while. I don't want to lose you in this, Tom said finally. You're not losing me, I replied. I think I'm just finally finding me again. He reached across the table and took my hand. And even though neither of us had all the answers in that moment, I felt something shift. A door creaking open. Not wide, not yet. But just enough for light to come in. 2 days after that quiet conversation with Tom, I got a message from Elise. It was short and sweet, just like her. Hi Claire. I was wondering if you'd like to come by for coffee sometime. I'd love to show you my little studio. No pressure. Just girl time. I stared at the message for a long moment, surprised by how much it stirred something in me. Not the invitation itself. Elise had always been gracious. But the idea of being seen by another woman. Of being invited into someone else's private, creative world. Something told me it wasn't just about coffee. So I typed back. I'd love that. Thursday afternoon. And just like that, it was a plan. Their home was just as beautiful in the daylight. Clean lines, wide windows, sunlight pouring into every corner. Elise greeted me at the door in a cozy linen blouse and jeans, barefoot, hair loosely pinned. She looked effortless, like the kind of woman who didn't chase grace. It followed her. She hugged me tightly. Come in. I've got strong coffee and even stronger lemon bars. I laughed and followed her through the house, past the kitchen, and into a sunroom I hadn't noticed during our dinner a week ago. The space felt different. It was vibrant and alive. The walls were lined with canvases, some framed, some leaning casually against the floor. There were florals, abstracts, a few portraits. Colors danced everywhere, bold strokes of ochre and indigo, soft washes of blush and slate. There was a faint smell of oil paint and citrus, and a large table covered in brushes, palettes, and a vase of wildflowers. I stopped just inside the doorway, stunned. You made all of these? I asked quietly. Elise smiled and poured 2 mugs of coffee. Everyone. They're incredible. Thank you. She handed me a cup, her eyes warm. They're not meant to impress. Just express. We sat in 2 mismatched chairs in the corner, cushions soft, the air between us easy. How long have you been painting? I asked. Only seriously for the last 5 years, she said. Though the love was always there. I was an art teacher in my 20s. Then marriage, kids, life. You know how it goes. I nodded slowly. I do. I forgot about myself for a long time, she continued. And I didn't even notice I'd disappeared. Until one day I realized I couldn't remember the last time I did something just for me. Her words hit me like a quiet wave. I sipped my coffee and stared at one of her paintings. A sun setting behind tall trees, brushstrokes wild and unapologetic. I've been feeling that way lately, I admitted. Like I've been on autopilot for years. Suddenly, I want more. Not a new life. Just my own piece of this one. Elise nodded like she'd been waiting for me to say it. That's exactly how it starts. I've started sketching again, I said, my voice almost shy. It's nothing serious. But it feels like breathing. That is serious, she said softly. And it's beautiful. For a long moment we just sat in silence. Not the awkward kind, but the kind that makes room for reflection. Then Elise leaned forward, her elbows on her knees. You know, Mason asks a lot of bold questions. He's always been like that. But he's also very perceptive. I met her eyes. You mean what he said to me at dinner? She nodded. He saw something in you. And honestly, so did I. My throat tightened. It's hard to admit it, but I think I've been invisible to myself for a long time. Elise reached over and touched my hand. Then maybe this is the season where you stop fading into the background. Her words didn't land like advice. They landed like permission. I left their house that afternoon with a lemon bar wrapped in foil, a heart that felt cracked open in the best way, and something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Hope. The following week moved like a quiet tide, steady on the surface, but with something stirring underneath. Every morning I woke up early. Earlier than I needed to. While Tom slept, I slipped out of bed, padded to the kitchen, made coffee and settled into the sunroom with my sketchbook. At first, I drew softly, cautious lines, small studies of flowers, simple landscapes. But day by day something in me loosened. The strokes grew bolder, messier, more alive. I stopped trying to make things pretty. I just let them be real. It had been so long since I'd made something that wasn't useful. Something that didn't have a purpose other than being mine. And the more I drew, the more I remembered parts of myself I'd long buried under decades of caretaking and schedules and laundry loads. One morning I painted a field of wild poppies. Big, red, untamed blossoms stretching under a golden sky. I didn't plan it. I just felt it. And when I stepped back to look at the finished piece, I felt tears well in my eyes. I wasn't crying because it was beautiful. It wasn't perfect at all. But it looked like freedom. It looked like the version of myself I'd tucked away for safekeeping, waiting for a someday that never seemed to come. And now, somehow she was coming back. That evening, Tom walked into the sunroom while I was wiping paint off my fingers. He paused in the doorway looking at the canvas. "You painted this?" he asked. I nodded, unsure how he'd react. He stepped closer, staring. Wow. It's really something, Claire." I smiled softly, just trying to see if I still remember how. He looked at me, really looked. For the first time in a long time I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not confusion. Not concern. But something gentler. Maybe curiosity. Maybe awe. Then he said, "Is this because of what Mason said that night?" I didn't want to make it about that. But I also didn't want to lie. Maybe it nudged something I was already feeling, I admitted. "I'm not unhappy, Tom. I think I forgot how to want something for me." He nodded slowly. "I never meant to make you feel forgotten." "I know," I said. "But I think I did that to myself too." We stood in the quiet together, side by side, the air thick with things neither of us had said in years. "You've always been the strong one," he said after a pause. Maybe I leaned on that too much. "You've carried a lot too," I replied gently. "But maybe we both forgot that strength doesn't mean shrinking." He glanced at the painting again. "It's bold." I looked at it, then back at him. "So am I. I think I just forgot that." Tom reached for my hand and we stood there quietly holding each other's fingers. Not out of habit but out of something that felt more like rediscovery. Later that night, long after the dishes were done and the house had gone still, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling fans spinning above me. And for the first time in years I wasn't asking myself what I had lost. I was wondering what I might still find. 2 weeks after Elise's invitation and my quiet return to painting, I did something I hadn't done in years. I said yes to something spontaneous. It started with a phone call. Elise again, her voice warm, bright as always. "Claire, there's an art exhibit this weekend at the community center," she said. "It's a local showcase. Nothing formal, just people putting their work out there. I thought of you immediately." I laughed softly. "Me? Oh no. I'm barely back to holding a brush." Elise didn't waver. "Exactly. That's why it's perfect. It's full of people in the middle of rediscovering themselves. That includes you." I paused. I almost gave her an automatic excuse. "I'm busy, I'm not ready, I need more time." But instead I heard myself say, "Oh, I'll come." Saturday came and with it a strange flutter of nerves. I stood in my closet longer than usual, staring at my clothes. Not in vanity but in curiosity. I didn't want to disappear in beige today. I didn't want to fade into the background. So I chose something different. A loose-fitting indigo blouse with paint-stained sleeves, soft black jeans, and a long pendant I hadn't worn in years. My hair, slightly wind-tousled, hung freely around my shoulders. I looked in the mirror and for once didn't try to smooth everything down. I let myself look like I felt, in motion. When I arrived at the community center, the front doors were propped open with planters spilling over with marigolds. Inside, the room buzzed with quiet joy. Easels lined the walls. Canvases leaned against tables. Some pieces were polished. Others were raw, emotional, even chaotic. But every corner of the space pulsed with heart. Elise spotted me from across the room and waved. You came. She introduced me to other women, some younger, some older, each of them with stories etched into their hands and eyes. There was June, who took up collage after her divorce. Marisol, a grandmother who painted bold abstracts in colors that could sing. A shy teenager named Lily who had painted her anxiety as a blackbird trapped in a glowing cage. I listened and I shared. Hesitantly at first, but then with more ease than I expected. When someone asked what I was working on, I mentioned the wild poppy field and Elise gently nudged my arm. Show them the photo. I had taken a picture of it on my phone, not to share but to remember. I hesitated, then pulled it up. They leaned in, nodded, smiled. One woman, a quiet redhead named Denise, whispered, "That's fierce." I laughed. I don't think anyone's ever used that word to describe me. Maybe they should start, she replied, eyes kind. Later that evening, Elise and I sat on a bench outside the center, watching the sky turn to lavender and ash. You were glowing today, she said. I was nervous, I admitted. You still glowed. I looked down at my hands. They were smudged with charcoal. Paint still clung to my fingernails. And for the first time in so long, I liked the way I looked. Messy but alive. Do you ever think it's too late? I asked softly. To become someone new? Elise shook her head. No. I think we just become more ourselves. And that's never too late. We sat in the silence for a while, the kind that doesn't rush or press. Around us, people left in pairs and groups, still laughing, still carrying something intangible home. As I drove back, the windows cracked just enough for the wind to dance through my hair. I felt something shift in my chest. Not grief. Not even nostalgia. But a quiet sense of becoming. A life I hadn't planned was starting to breathe beside the one I'd carefully built. And for once I didn't feel disloyal. I felt whole. 3 weeks later, I stood in my sunroom, sunlight stretching long and warm across the floor, staring at the canvas that had both challenged and healed me. It was the poppy field painting, the one I had thought was just for me. But it had become more than that. It was a marker. A beginning. A declaration. Something in me had asked for permission that day. And this painting had given it. No. I was hanging it up. Not just in the house but on the wall right at the front entrance. Tom stood beside me, hammer in hand, waiting for my nod. I watched him, his eyes following my expression, and I could tell he understood what this moment meant to me. Maybe he didn't feel it the same way. But he respected it. And that, more than anything, told me we were learning how to grow in the same direction again. Right here, he asked. I nodded. Right there. He nailed the hook gently, with more care than I'd ever seen him take for any frame. When the painting was finally in place, I stepped back, folded my arms, and stared at it. It was vivid. A little wild. Imperfect. Alive. Like me. That night, over dinner, Tom surprised me. I've been thinking, he said, cutting into his roasted potatoes. About how long it's been since we did something together that wasn't about maintenance. The house. The bills. The routines. I looked up, curious. There's a photography class starting next month. Saturday mornings. At the same place you went to that exhibit. I thought maybe I'd sign up. I blinked. Really? He smiled shyly. I used to love taking pictures. Thought maybe it was time to remember that. Something warm filled my chest. Not just pride. Connection. A subtle but powerful thread pulling us forward together, not out of habit but by choice. Then I think you should, I said, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. Maybe rediscovery didn't have to mean disconnection. A week later, I opened my very first online shop. Elise helped me build a simple website. Nothing fancy, just a digital corner of the world where I could post my work. I named it Still Becoming because that's exactly what I was. I didn't expect sales. I didn't care about numbers. But the day someone bought a print of the poppy painting and sent a message saying, "This piece made me cry in the best way." Thank you, I did cry. And it wasn't because someone liked my work. It was because I had reached someone, and in doing so I had reached myself. One morning, standing by the kitchen window, coffee in hand, I noticed how the light hit the wall just right. How the shadows danced across the wooden floor. And I smiled. Because I didn't feel faded anymore. I wasn't waiting for something to begin. It had already begun. A book. My name is Claire. I'm 56 years old. And I've stopped apologizing for wanting more. Not more things. Not more drama. Just more of me. And that, I've learned, is not selfish. It's sacred. Because the most powerful thing a woman can do isn't to start over. It's to start again. From exactly where she is. As exactly who she's becoming. Still growing. Still breathing. Still becoming.